I think we talked about that this week. I think we met each other in 1988 at the Virginia session of the five-star camp. So that's a long time. And we had to decide if we were going to sit on the left side of the lectern or the right side of the lectern to know what camp we were in back in those days, because sometimes it could be a little territorial at five stars. So we were both young whippersnappers trying to make it up through the ranks there and prove ourselves. So we've got a lot of history. Absolutely. I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your Thursday night on a holiday weekend coming up to consider whatever I got to say valuable enough to tune in. I would probably should thank your wives, those that are married, or your girlfriends that giving you the time to listen to just an old ball coach like me. I just call myself a basketball guy. I've been on most of these Zooms, Living Trophy Zooms, and Coach Sutton's done, and I kind of just sit back and I see who's on there, and I don't think there's anybody on here that's older than me. So I've got a lot of experiences. So hopefully I can share a few things tonight and answer some questions if anybody wants to talk about my journey and some of the things I've done to get where I started to where I've been blessed to get to now. And I kind of don't want to go too long, but I do have to say this kind of as a preface. You know, my father was a fire and brimstone preacher, and he always said a woman's hair and a woman's dress should be like a sermon. It should have a little length to it. So if I get to rambling too much, somebody raise their hand or something and just kind of bring me back in, because I'll get on some things and some things I believe in and may go too long. And kind of title what I was going to share about tonight is just random thoughts of a coach who's had too much idle time on his hands. It's been a long time. It's been since March the 13th since I've physically seen one of our players. I mean, I'm tired of looking at him on FaceTime and on Zooms and trying to help him continue to get better that way. I miss the actual FaceTime with those guys and being in the gym and meeting and having meetings where we are in the office or out to lunch or whatever, and just trying to pour a little bit of invest myself into their lives. So. I kind of look at my journey. I kind of say I'm a basketball poor man's version of Forrest Gump. I shouldn't be on this Zoom talking to you tonight. I mean, I didn't have all the things that went through in the movie Forrest Gump, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of basketball. I started coaching at the smallest private school, Christian. My father was a pastor, and his church sponsored a Christian education-based school. And that's where I started, first as an elementary school coach and then a junior high coach. And then at the age of 21, as I finished playing as a walk-on player at Memphis State, I became a head high school coach. And I learned this, and since Russ was supposed to share the scripture and he hasn't yet, I'll start mine with a little bit of a scripture here tonight. In Proverbs 16:9, it says, "In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps." And that's the way my life's taken from starting at that small little school with 15 people in the graduating class, and us able to win a couple of association championships and getting to have some players recruited and getting to meet people. It's just one thing led to another, from George Raveling, who was a consummate recruiter, sent an assistant down to see one of my players who ended up telling me I should get involved in five-star. So I got through there. I got to meet, Howard Garfinkel and Will Klein and all the great coaches at that time when the college coaches were working there. And that was a learning ground for all coaches. It wasn't just a camp for the players. Your ability to learn how to be a teacher as a coach it was the pinnacle for that. I don't think they'll ever be replaced, because you sat there and you could watch 5 lectures every day where you took more notes than you could do watching any clinic. And then that night after camp closed down, you go sit at the restaurant or just in the dorm, and everybody just sitting around bouncing ideas off each other and talking basketball. And it just became a huge encyclopedia resource for me to build as I say, a basketball guy should have the heart of a teacher. And it just helped my ability to become a teacher of the game. And so going from there, I wasn't making much money. I had a family. And as I tell people all the time, once you have a wife and kids, you have to start doing things that affects their happiness more so than affects your dreams and goals. And so I had to start trying to find a place where I could sustain my family a little bit more. I got hired at the biggest private school in the state of Mississippi, down in Jackson. And I was at Jackson Academy in Jackson, Mississippi for 5 years. And again, through that Forrest Gump type deal, I'd come from Memphis, which was a basketball city, as Coach JJ and from Memphis like I am, and we take pride in being basketball people. I wasn't into all the stuff. So I had my players playing team camp, and at that time segregation and the busing issues and stuff were going on, and I never let my kids at a pretty much an affluent private white school. We played in the city summer league, we played in the city all-star game, we played in all the local team camps, and we just started playing. I don't care who we was playing. We were going to go play ball, and I made great friends with Wayne Brent, Luther Riley, and I met Larry Stamps, who ended up running the Jackson Tigers. And he and I actually started having AAU back in the day, where the public school black players and the private school white players would start playing together. And through that interaction, we went and go to the AAU national tournament. It was in Winston-Salem. I met Leonard Hamilton. Never met him before in my life. And within a 4-week period, I go from meeting Leonard Hamilton to getting hired from being a high school coach in Jackson, Mississippi, at a predominantly white school, but by a very prominent African-American head coach, and going to the city of Miami. And I've been on a 25-year journey with Coach Ham now out of the last 26 years, and go from there. And at that time, Miami's program was a little bit shaky. Coach had a big year the year before I got there, and they'd gone to the NIT with a big turnaround from going 0-19 in the Big East to 9-9, one of the biggest turnarounds in 1 year. And he went to the NIT, and I came in the next 5 years, and we had a great uptick. We went to 3 NCAA tournaments, won the Big East regular season title, and from there, Coach Hamilton got to be the head coach of the Washington Wizards, and I was blessed that he took me to be one of his front of the bench assistant coaches, along with Larry Drew and Johnny Bach, which is another where I just met guys that just poured into me as basketball people, because Larry was a lifetime and a future NBA head coach. Johnny Bach had been with Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan in the first three-peat, and had been part of the Doberman defense design. And sitting next to Johnny every night was just like you're sitting there, you're listening to, you're listening to history every night of him talking about, I remember when they ran this at Fordham in 1952 kind of deal. And he's talking about all these actions that would come out and different defensive schemes and that kind of stuff. And so you go from there, and Coach Hamilton gets let go, and we'll talk about that story another night. And I go to Mississippi State for a year with Rick Stansberry, and we're fortunate enough to turn the corner there. We win the SEC tournament championship. I'd spent the whole year working on trying to become a head coach. Coach Hamilton had been helping me. I didn't think Coach Hamilton may not get back in coaching. And we'd been working on a specific situation. And the night we get put out of the NCAA tournament in the second round, and we're coming back to Starkville from the airport, I get a call from Coach Hamilton, and he asked, can I talk? And I said, no, I'm on the bus. He said, well, as soon as you can get free, call me. And he told me that night he was taking the Florida State job and wanted to know if I would come back and be his associate head coach. And we're now starting our 19th year at Florida State. So my journey's allowed me to be part of the NBA. I've been over 500 wins in high major Division I, over 350 wins as a high school head coach. And I don't say that pretentiously. I say that purely out of thanksgiving to the man upstairs who's guided my path, like that scripture in Proverbs 16:9 says. But I also know we talk about, we all want to motivate our players. We all are looking for quotes. We all look for things for inspiration for ourselves. And I think sometimes we forget what the Bible is the best self-help book of all time. And I was talking about that, looking at some things, talking about this talk tonight. And in 1 Corinthians 8:2, it said, the man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know. So as I transition from my career story into what I want to share with you guys here for a few minutes before we take some questions is, the one thing I've learned, and Coach Sutton and I talk about this a lot, and we answer a lot of questions, I never try to act like I know everything. The success I've had has all been because God's blessing on my life and the hard work I've tried to put in. So every week since I've been coaching in high school, I try to work on 3 things. And these are the 3 things I try to work on at this point in my career. The first thing is I try to work on the man, Stan Jones. So every week I'm going to find some way to enhance my spiritual life. I'm going to read. I'm going to listen to something about my financial life. I'm going to listen to something, read something, study something about my spiritual life. I'm going to read something and talk about family relationships. I'm a grandfather now, how to have better relationships with my grandchildren and inspire them, because if I'm not a hero in my own house, I've been a failure. And all you guys that have families right now, I would encourage you to take that philosophy on in your life. As much as we want to make a difference in the players we coach, and that's one of our motivations on being a coach, is if you're not a hero in your own house, you failed in life. And so that's where you got to start. The second thing I try to work on every week is the assistant coach, Stan Jones. I try to find ways to study every week on something. I try to get on a Zoom where I've been on Ryan Panone stuff. I've been on Coach Sutton stuff. Just listening, trying to find something that I know that would enhance what we do at Florida State, would lift up my head coach, would make what our head coach believes in, make it stronger, and be able to present it to him and our team, or maybe be something that could help me as I have interactions with my players, that I can inspire them better. I can give them more wisdom. I can give them more motivation to not just achieve their potential, but to achieve beyond their potential. So I work on that second. And then the third thing I try to do every week, I try to work on the University of Stan Jones. And what I mean by that cute little line is I'm always preparing for the future. Now, I'm 60 years old now. I've been an assistant coach now for 26 years after a 14-year run as a head high school coach. But every week I try to work on something in the event that God decides that he wants me to be a head coach. If something happens where Coach Hamilton became ill, or something happens and I'd have to step in for that moment, I want to be prepared at the best of my ability to think like a head coach. So that may not be everything that walks hand in hand with what I'm doing as the assistant coach. I'm working on things that if I get that opportunity, that I can step into that moment and hit it running without having any anxiety or any fear of going forward, because every week I've worked on something, putting what I believe my staff should be doing, preparing myself for that, what my first team meeting should be like. I have interview questions that I would ask in an interview process. Everything that I would try to present, if I'm in an interview process, I'm always trying to tweak it. I'm trying to prepare it. So if I get that opportunity, I'm not scrambling and trying to do something in such a rush that I make mistakes. And I challenge all the young coaches on staff. Coach Sutton and I talk about this all the time, and we've probably talked to a couple of you guys. I think Russ has probably got this talk a time or two. Is the biggest problem with young coaches is you try to move so fast and you end up making careless mistakes. Kind of like when we took math tests when we were in high school. You always screwed up your math test because you rushed trying to get through and because you didn't really like being on the math test, and you end up making careless mistakes. So I'm trying to do things as thinking as a head coach, so I don't rush into something and I'm making careless mistakes, but I'm walking in with confidence. And that's the same way I look at things in preparing for, people sometimes give me a little credit for being pretty good in situational stuff. It goes back to the 5-star stuff with the situational tournament they used to do and everything, but I take pride in that. But I try to prepare for those things before we ever get in the moment. And if you're not preparing for that thing, you're going to make a careless mistake in a situation. If you're asked to be in charge of those situations, whether you're a head coach or an assistant coach, if you haven't thought those things out well in advance. And so that's what I mean by I try to work on the University of Stan Jones, wherever that could be at some point. And guess what? If it doesn't happen, I'm still at peace with myself because I know I gave myself the best opportunity. So going from there, I want to give you 9 things that I think have been great, that I think Coach Hamilton, I've learned from him. But I've been reading a lot this year in 2020, military leaders' books. I've spent time looking. I read a lot of football coaches' books, and I think they do a great job of setting up leadership strategies and organizational stuff. And I listen to different success people in the business world. And this year, I've kind of been working on military things. And there was a book my son gave me at Christmas time called Call Sign Chaos, which is about General Jim Mattis, who, if you follow the news cycle, has been in there a little recently because he has gone at our president after being his defense secretary on some issues that I think General Mattis is right on. But I took out of there 9 things that he talked about in leadership in terms of running a unit in the military. And I just translated them in what we can do as coaches. And I'm going to kind of read those to you, and then you can write them down. If you need me to repeat them again, please just unmute yourself and say, could I repeat it? And then I kind of talk about how I think it works so good for us at Florida State. The first one is, anytime I put the basketball phrase in there, think about how I just replaced that with a military term. He said, as a coach, you only have to win one battle for the hearts of your players. Win their hearts, and they will win their fights. And I think as coaches, and I'll read each one of them twice, so if anybody's taking notes. As a coach, you only have to win one battle for the hearts of your players. Win their hearts, and they will win their fights. And I would tell you, from 25 years with Leonard Hamilton, and he and I being kind of yoked together in the same philosophy of, first off, you do that with your players, allows you to be successful. The reason Florida State and all the places Coach Hamilton's been in college that he's been successful is he is a master at winning the hearts of his players. His ability to understand what his players need, even as a guy who's much older than him now, he's not the young guy back when he was starting out at Oklahoma State or as an assistant at Kentucky. He has this God's gift is all the way I can put it, of being able to sit and talk as a group to win their hearts, and also to talk to them individually and pour things into their life that resonate immediately and allow kids to want to play hard for him, want to stay playing for him until it's time for their eligibility to be up, or if it's time for them to go pro. So we don't have a lot of transfer situations because Coach Hamilton demands of us as a staff, but he leads that by example on winning the hearts of your players. And if you do that, you're going to give yourself a chance to win a lot of games. The second concept I got out of that book was how the job is to be accomplished is up to you, but it is clear that you have to deliver results. How the job is to be accomplished is up to you, but it is clear that you have to deliver results. And I think we all know that. There's a lot of college guys on this Zoom tonight. We know we have to win to keep our job. But the one thing I want to emphasize this, and I think this is where Coach Hamilton has been so proactive and been so well thought out in our career. He's not been a guy that just created one system and just stayed with it for his entire career. When we started out together 26 years ago, we were the old school Bobby Knight 3-out, 2-in motion, trying to run that, and that worked at that time for the type of players we had. Then we went to more of a secondary break with early offense and high-low stuff. And that worked for what we had. It ended up helping us win the 2012 ACC championship because we could play Bernard James and Xavier Gibson and John Kreft and O'Carl White in those situations at a very high level. And then after that year, though, he could have stayed right with that, but he started seeing how the game was transcending in the NBA. We went to Greece in 2013 on our NCAA tournament year. NCAA summer tour year where we're allowed to go on. We trained with the Greek senior men's national team. With a fabulous coach was coaching them, Andrea Trinchieri. If you ever see any of his video stuff, you should pour into his stuff. He's an offensive genius. And we started seeing how the game was going in Europe. And so we started working on putting a system together that would relate to the guys we were probably going to be able to recruit. We saw coming through our regions that we tried to recruit the most out of. And we've just continued to evolve. And even into our defensive system, we've gone from strictly a half court, more close to a pack line deal to now extending out and being more of a switch pressure deal because coach has been understanding that if I'm going to deliver results, I've got to be able to figure out how we're going to do it. And so the point of that is make yourself a guy that's not stuck in one area, and you're always being proactive and forward thinking on what's coming next for your team and your organization and your program, because it's never going to stay the same. The third concept I took out of the book, Call Sign Chaos: read about basketball history, but study a few coaches in depth. Learning from others' mistakes and successes is far smarter than taking losses on your own. Read about basketball history, but study a few coaches in depth. Learning from others' mistakes and successes is far smarter than taking losses on your own. And that's one of the things I've learned in reading these military leadership books. Military leaders, they spend hours reading books on wars and battles back into the Middle Ages, trying to see what caused teams, armies or military forces to win or to lose that could be similar to what was going on in their world at that moment. And so as you go through your basketball thing, that's why I've been trying to get on as many Zooms as I can and watch as many Euro League and Euro Cup coaches and see what they're doing over there, because that's kind of where the game's going. So I try to study all those things as much as I can. Coach Hamilton's very proactive thinking that way and looking for little things and wrinkles we can add and change to keep us moving in a direction where we can always continue to be successful in what we're doing. So I'd encourage you to be a voracious reader and study, a student of past coaches, current coaches, and guys, and figure out, and even guys that weren't successful, and figure out why they weren't successful. Fourth was consistently, and I think this is the hardest for young coaches, consistently maintain a social and personal distance, remembering there is a line you must not cross. But you should come as close to that line as possible without surrendering 1 ounce of your authority. You are not their friend. You are their coach, who is rewarding the qualities essential to championship victory. Consistently maintain a social and personal distance, remembering there is a line you must not cross, but you should come as close to that line as possible without surrendering 1 ounce of your authority. You are not their friend. You are their coach, who is rewarding the qualities essential to championship victory. And, I think that's tough in our society right now because, kids want to, feel that they don't have sometimes great family units, but we have to learn how to be the family unit for them in being the parental figure, the grandparental figure, the uncle, the aunt, whatever that would be, as above them, so they learn how to have somebody to look up to instead of wanting to just be the guy that's just kicking it with them and just hanging with them and just kind of living in their yard all the time. Is you got to show them what their yard can look like when they get to different spots in their life than where they are now. So I've always tried to do that when I was a head high school coach, to have great relationships with my players, but I never try to get to that point where I cross a line where I'm over into some area that, they start not recognizing that I'm the authority at the moment. They're the subordinate at the moment, but they also know that when it's over with, we're going to be lifetime friends. So I think as we go through our jobs as coaches, we need to understand that dynamic of, for that time you have them 1 to 4 years, and if longer, sometimes if you're a high school coach and brought some guys up younger, make sure they see an example of what a great leader looks like.
Coach Jones,
yes.
What did you say after a line you shouldn't cross?
Okay. But you should come as close. Remembering there's a line you must not cross, but you should come as close to that line as possible. Yes, you got to get to know them. You got to show a little vulnerability to them. Vulnerability is power, because when they start seeing a leader can be vulnerable, it starts allowing them to kind of put down some walls. But I got to get back to reading that for Jerry. But you should come as close to that line as possible without surrendering 1 ounce of your authority. You are not their friend. You are their coach, who is rewarding the qualities essential to championship victory. And again, I'm just taking this. If you go back and took everything out of that from where a military person could put things in there, you can pluck and choose where you need to put these things in your own personal philosophy. I'm just throwing it out here I got random thoughts tonight. Jerry, did I get everything for you?
Yes, you got everything. Thank you.
No problem. Number 5, and I think this is really important for us guys that are in college that are recruiting. And I think we have really honed in on this at Florida State here in the last 5 or 6 years. Recruit for attitude and train for skill. We expect attitude to be a weapon system for our success. Search for intangible character traits, a quest for competition, a humility to play with the elite, and the intention to become the best player they can be by playing with us. Now start that over again. Recruit for attitude and train for skill. We expect attitude to be a weapon system for our success. Search for intangible character traits, a quest for competition, a humility to play with the elite, and the intention to become the best player they can be by playing with us.
Hey, Coach, sorry to interrupt. One more time, please.
Yep. Recruit for attitude and train for skill. We expect attitude to be a weapon system for our success. Search for intangible character traits, a quest for competition, a humility to play with the elite, and the intention to become the best player they can be by playing with us. And it's in there important to make sure you put with and not for. They want to be a part of who we are. And when you start getting guys that the first part, a quest for competition. That means they want to win. You know, they got a competitive spirit about themselves. You know, the great players have a humility that they know that they want to be a great player beyond Florida State or whatever school they're at, they got to learn to play with the elite. So you got to have a humbleness, and you got to be able to be happy for your teammates. You got to be able to happy when your team wins and you didn't play great. And you got to be a guy that can function in a locker room with other alpha males. And so they got to have that humility, and then they got to be people that are self-motivated, that they want to be the best, but they want to learn to do that by playing with us instead of us thinking we're playing with them or they're playing for us, where there's not that dynamic that we're all on the same page. A couple more here, and then we'll go to the next phase, and we'll ask questions or whatever Coach Sutton would want us to do. Number 6, again, this is important for all of us as assistant coaches and for you guys when you become head coaches. Coach Hamilton said this to me when I first joined his staff. You know, he said the hardest thing you do as a head coach is hire your staff, and it's the most important thing you have to do. And he said, when I quit hiring just my friends and people I knew and started filling in my leadership gaps is when I started becoming a better head coach. And so said that on the front end to say what it came out of this book. It said, with all effective staffs, everyone must own the mission. It is always our mission, never my mission. As head coach, you must clearly state the intent and unleash your staff's initiative. As the leader of the program, follow the sequence. Coach Sutton and I have talked about this, and here's the sequence because it's really important in today's world. Follow the sequence. As the leader of the program, follow the sequence. Listen, learn, help, then lead. Listen, learn, help, then lead. And I'll go back and repeat the whole thing one more time for guys. With all effective staffs, everyone must own the mission. It is always our mission, never my mission. As head coach, you must clearly state the intent and unleash your staff's initiative. As the leader of the group, follow the sequence. Listen, learn, help, then lead. And Coach Sutton and I have talked about this a little bit. This is very important in today's social climate, especially for guys that look like me with things that are going on. As a leader and a person who wants to affect change in young people's lives and in our society, for me to do anything to help my team right now, I have to listen first. I need to listen to what's going on and really get to know and have the knowledge of what's going on. That goes to point 2. I got to learn. Then I got to figure out how to help my guys go through that and then lead them on into greater success by using all the new things that are going on in life. So I think that sequence, and that's how the military tries to go through problems that's going on when they're in battle. Listen, learn, help, and then lead. A lot of times we start putting leading at the front instead of understanding we got to know our troops before we can help them rise to the situation they're in. Last 3, number 7, as the leader of your program, you can only be satisfied with 100% commitment from the group and be completely dissatisfied with 99%. You can't have an elite program if you look the other way when someone craps out on you. As the leader of your program, you can only be satisfied with 100% commitment from the group and be completely dissatisfied with 99%. You can't have an elite program if you look the other way when someone craps out on you. And again, I think that's sometimes a problem for leadership in our world right now is that we tend to say, we'll let that one go. And that doesn't mean you have to be a tyrant. That doesn't mean you have to have some crazy punishment for somebody's lack of discipline. But I think that makes Coach Hamilton so successful is he's patient, but he is consistent. And I've tried to learn the patience that he has because I was always kind of a bit more of a, growing up in an old minister's home, there wasn't a whole lot of gray areas, either right and wrong, black, white. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion about things. But Coach Hamilton never lets something go without addressing it. It may not be a huge attack. It may not be a huge disciplinary thing, but it's always going to get addressed. And it's going to be addressed immediately without a lot of delay in a way that the players know that that's not acceptable. And that's why coach is he's not a screamer, a yeller, doesn't curse kids out, doesn't kick over trash cans, doesn't do that kind of stuff. He just says, this is how we respond. This is what I expect. If you don't reach this, this is the repercussions from it. And I think our guys really, really buy into that over time as they see that, when they do make a mistake, he's not going to say, well, I'll let them have that one. If they don't go to class, you just tell them, you don't go to class, I'm just not going to play you. I'm not going to scream and yell at you. I'm not going to threaten you. You just sit that one out. And I'm content enough in my career that if we lose a game, we'll lose a game, and you'll have to affect that with your teammates. But as leaders, and if we're going to be winners and we're going to have great programs, I think that's a huge factor into what you're doing. Number 8, the General Mattis nickname was Chaos, which was his call sign when they talked for him through their radio transmissions. And what Chaos was a acronym for Colonel has another outstanding solution when he was a colonel. So I kind of changed it and just said Chaos equals Coach has another outstanding solution. CHAOSA. Coach has another outstanding solution. Now, what that means is you got to have solutions, but you also got to be able to let your staff have solutions. And I kind of alluded to this earlier for you guys that want to be head coaches. As you start, and I think about these things all the time, and I work on the University of Stan Jones. Who am I going to have to hire to fill in my leadership gaps? Obviously, at my age right now, I'm going to have to hire some younger guys that can be more of know what the music that's being played, know what's going on in their culture at that moment, be able to talk on some topics that may not be in my wheelhouse. So after it said Coach has another solution, the rest of that statement was, but staff goal is to fill staff with much younger assistants who are smarter than you. So I was talking to myself in this. These are all my notes on working on me for the University of Stan Jones. And then the last part of that statement would be, give them your wisdom. And I appreciate Coach Sutton say that on the front end. A lot of old coaches helped me when I was a young guy starting, and I'm always willing to help young coaches, give them what wisdom I have. So if you're going to be a guy that's a chaos type guy, Coach has another outstanding solution. You got to know if you're a young guy, you're probably going to need to get some old heads on your staff. If you're an old guy like me, you got to get some young staff. For me, it was my staff goal is to fill staff with much younger assistants who are smarter than you, and then give them your wisdom. And then to the last one, number 9 was, this is what the best coaches are the master at. We don't win our fight with an equal or slightly superior opponent because we have faster reflexes. We win because we connect our movements to a brain that thinks faster than our opponents. Observe what is going on, orient yourself, decide what to do, then act before your opponent has completed their version of the same process. Repeating and repeating that loop faster than your foe. Repeat that again. I'll start from the top. This is what the best coaches are the master at. We don't win our fight with an equal or slightly superior opponent because we have faster reflexes. We win because we connect our movements to a brain that thinks faster than our opponent. Observe what is going on. And I had observed all capitals in my notes. Orient yourself. Orient was all in capital letters for me. Decide what to do. Decide was in all capitals for me. Then act. And act was in all capital letters for me before your opponent has completed their version of that same process. Repeating and repeating that loop faster than your foe. And that relates a lot to us at Florida State because there's several guys in here from our league. I mean, our league has certain tiers of advantages. And for any of us that are trying to compete and be in the top tier of that league, this has to probably be the most important thing that you study and learn how to do as a coach if you're going to coach in a league like the Atlantic Coast Conference. And you've got to be able to have a little edge because there's going to be some teams that just naturally are going to have may have a little more talent on the floor than your team overall. And a lot of times the best you can do is get equal with them. There's very few times, unless you're that advantageous program, that you're not the best you can get to is equal. So you've got to figure out a way to teach and to develop and to study things so you can have your players outthink and you can have your staff outthink the people you're going through and be able to do it on a consistent basis. And I kind of tore that over. I think Coach Warren was on a Zoom I was on not too long ago, and I can go to that. I can go to questions, Coach Sutton, whatever you think we need to do right now. But there's eight things I think all coaches have to develop in a certain sequence, and one of them is directly responds to this. That I could go down those 8 things if you want me to go there, and then we can open up for questions. Start questions now.
Absolutely, we want you to go down through your 8 pillars, for lack of a better term, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay.
Okay, and I'm gonna be pretty brief because they're pretty self-explanatory, and they carry over into those things that just reinforce things with me. You know, one of the things that's been one of the most important words in my career, and I try to use it with our program at Florida State, is development. Development is the number one word, and I define development by this: continue doing the right things day in and day out, exercising a long obedience in the same direction. And I'll go back to referring to the young coaches on this Zoom tonight. Don't try to skip steps. Don't try to run too fast. Go through this sequence and you'll be great. Because it takes a long obedience. And the problem with most young coaches, they don't understand how long can be, because long is very ambiguous. Sometimes you get a break early. Sometimes you don't get a break till late. But you got to keep doing the right things day in and day out, exercising a long obedience in the same direction. And that has to be upward. And so I came up with 8 to have a great coaching career. I think you have to have 8 areas you develop yourself in, and I think you have to do them in this order. And if you get them out of order, you're going to screw up. And when you get opportunities, that's going to get slapped in your face and going to get exposed when the pressure hits. And the first one's pretty easy. I don't have to explain this one because everybody on this Zoom has this, because I know a lot of you guys on here. Is number one, you have to develop your vision. All people who are world changers, whatever your world is, not just a world changer in terms of our globe. If you're a change of agent in your world, just in the basketball community that you work in, you have to have a vision, a clear vision of what you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and what you want it to look like when it's over. And that's where a lot of people in coaching, they kind of lose they want to say they're burned out, but they lost their focus of their vision. And so you got to have that vision. And every time adversity hits, you got to be able to refer back to that vision. So the first thing you have to do is develop your vision. I started that at 17 years old when I was coaching elementary kids on Saturday mornings while I was a walk-on player at Memphis State. Once a bug hit me, I wanted to be a Division I head coach. And I still keep working in that order after all these years of doing something right now. And I've known how I wanted to coach. I know how I wanted to look as a coach. I would know how I wanted to sound as a coach. I've known how I wanted my team to play. I noticed how I wanted my team to respond in critical situations. And I wanted to know how my team would react when things didn't go well in adversity. So, and it's all because I put that in my vision. The second thing is, a lot of coaches on here, you say you want to have values for your program. I don't have core values. I have core convictions. So the second thing you have to develop is your convictions. And the difference between, for me, and again, this is all up for, we can discuss this. We can have a debate about it when we get to the questions if you want to. Values are things you write down on paper with ink. Convictions are things that you're willing to have blood, sweat, and tears with, for lack of a better term. Convictions are things that you don't want to go through again, but you're glad you went through it. Starting out at that little small private school in 1981 as a head high school coach on a program that had never had a winning season, I don't want to go back and do that again, but I'm glad I did, because those years of putting my blood, sweat, and tears when I didn't have a budget, I painted my own locker rooms. I drove kids to camp. I drove kids to every game. I coached the ninth grade team, the B team, and the varsity team on the same night by myself. I ran practice by myself. All those things made my conviction stronger. So as you go through life, you have to develop what those convictions are. Convictions are all the time developing in your life. Values are things that we kind of come up with, we give to our program. But for yourself, you have to develop your convictions to be a great coach. That's your second step. The third step in development, I think, for a coach is after you've got your convictions, now you have to develop your commitment to your mission. Develop your commitment to your mission, because I've seen a lot of guys that have been close to making it to the next level and to having Hall of Fame type success, and they didn't have enough commitment to their mission. When it got a little bit difficult, when it got a little bit not the way they wanted it to go, they fell apart because they just didn't have their vision in place, they didn't have their convictions in place, and they wasn't committed enough. And if you're going to do this, you have to be, my dad used to say this all the time. When he decided to become a Christian, he said he jumped in ankle deep. And people say, well, that's not that deep if you're jumping in ankle deep. And he would always say, well, it is if you jump in head first. And so when you go into this business, if you're really going to be a coach of significance, you got to develop your ability to jump in head first and be into it all the way up from your top of your head to the bottom of your feet, and keep your commitment to that. And I would say this, the reasons that you end up losing your commitment is because you allow these things in your life. Always remember this. Don't whine. Don't complain. Make the most of your situation. Do little things that are big things. If your job isn't exciting, then bring some excitement to your job. Those should be the commitment to your mission, because we're not always going to be able to be at those advantageous programs, the blue bloods, as people like to call it. You know, one little term our players have bought into this year, and it could sound a little egotistical and stuff, but you know, they came up with a phrase this year: we're never going to be blue bloods, but we're going to be a new blood. And so our kids have kind of bought into that. So we didn't have a great program when we took over Florida State. So you can't whine about it. You can't complain about it. You have to make the most of your situation. Coach Sutton and I talk about this book for how many years now, about the old Frosty Westering book, Make the Big Time Where You Are. And every job I've seen Coach Sutton have, the jobs I had when I was a lowly high school coach, we didn't make excuses. We raised the money if we had to. We had the shoot-a-thons, the car washes, everything else in place. We did we drove the bus if we had to. We paid the officials out of the gate and all those kind of things we had to do. So you got to be able to take those things and do the little things that like they're the big things. And then if it's not exciting, you got to bring some excitement to it. There's one thing that I'm very proud of. The school I was at my last high school job, they wrote a book on the 50 years of the school. And during the segment of when they were talking about the era that I was there, they had two of my players write articles in that book about their experiences during that time. And they talked about how we turned it. It was a square building, but they called it the Raider Dome. And we had made up all these terms. You know, the football team had a sign up there that said, we're the I don't remember what their term was, but we took that down and said, we're the running Raiders. They wanted to be the fighting Raiders. I said, we ain't fighting. We running. We hooping. We playing. We're not doing that. We put excitement into it. And they talked about one of the players wrote it. And they said, I remember being in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and we snuck into the gym, and we'd have flashlights and some music, and we were trying to emulate what the varsity team that Coach Jones had been doing. So if your job's not what y'all want it to be, you got to bring some excitement to it on whatever form or fashion that could be. So I'll get off that and keep moving down this before we go too long on this. Before I ask, is that going to be who was going to take the collection up tonight? That was that Pastor Turner, or was that who was going to do that tonight?
It will be Pastor Turner, and then the second collection will be Daryl Hall.
Here we go. All right, number 4. After you've got your commitment in place, you got to develop your work ethic, and it's all kind of just exceeds on each other. If you're not committed, you're not going to have a work ethic. And you guys that are in college, you know, you guys that are young guys that are trying to get into college that are on here, you know, that's your work ethic is not just showing up because your coach tells you to be in there early and stay late. You know, your work ethic is, are you a guy that's always punctual? Players are never worried about if you're at the bus on time or you're into practice on time, or are we starting the meeting on time? Are you a guy that the compliance people are never worrying about where your paperwork is and how organized you are on the materials you have to get in? That's all part of the work ethic you have to have, and you have to be committed to being very good at that and not expecting somebody to do it for you to be an elite difference maker in this business. So develop your work ethic is 4. I'll speed this up a little bit. The 5th thing after you've got your work ethic going, and this is where we're on tonight, but you know, this started back when I was a 5-star guy. Develop your coaching knowledge. And that's why you need to always keep doing that. But if you don't do that when you're young, you'll make huge mistakes when you get to be a head coach. That's why I'm saying all this stuff has to be in order. The Hall of Fame coach Chuck Daly had a great quote I use all the time. He always said, you can't fool babies, dogs, and NBA players. So if you don't know the game of basketball and how to teach everything and have some answer that remotely gives you success, as a head coach, you will lose your players. You have to study the game so much that when pressure's on, they're looking for you at hope. And even the year I was in the NBA, the key to being a great coach in the NBA is the last 4 minutes of a 48 game. The only time they're really looking to the guys in the suit jackets are the guys when it gets there, and they're looking for you to put us in a position to win the game right now. And if you're not in, that's one reason I think Brad Stevens made the transition so well from college to coaching is he was worked so hard at that when he was at Butler. He became a guy that his after timeouts, his start of quarters, his end of quarter situations, his defensive adjustments allowed the great players, because your best players have to buy in at that level. They bought in because he gave them hope, and they also knew that was the best opportunity at that moment. Whether it worked or not, it's not always going to work, but those players knew that Brad had put a lot of time in that thinking process and could handle it without looking like he's nervous, not being able to put it on the board very efficiently, and all those things. So you have to develop your coaching knowledge is the fifth step. And then the last three, once you have your knowledge, you have to develop your teaching progression. And I see this as where a whole lot of young coaches miss the mark nowadays is they do go watch YouTube. They do go get on Zooms now since that's become the vogue thing right now, and they listen, they take notes, but then they don't sit down and say, and that was one of the things that was the beauty of 5-star is you listen to guys give clinics back in those days, and it was a teaching presentation. It wasn't just a bunch of rah-rah rebounds and put a lot of energy. Now, there was energy, but the knowledge was coming so fast in such a sequence, it made sense to the players. It made sense to the spectators. It made sense to the camp directors because they had an ability to develop their teaching progressions. And on one of my pages if I ever interview for a head coaching job, I put this is about Stan Jones. He's a basketball guy. That's all I put on there. And the first 4 things I say in the first one is, has the heart of a teacher, has the experience to win, has the vision to build, and the fourth one has the wisdom to motivate. And so those are the 4 things I put in there. But the first one is develop your teaching progressions on my ability to teach. And I'm a big fan of teaching the game of basketball and learning is whole part whole. I know a lot of times people now are not wanting to break off into drills, but I think you as a teacher, it doesn't have to be a bunch of drills, but you have to be able to show them what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that's what makes our defense really good is then we break our stuff down into parts. We coach our defense like camp at Florida State, and we did it at Miami. We got one coach at every basket, and we're rotating through 3 to 5 minute stations of 2-on-2, how to defend a cross screen, how to defend the down screen, how to defend the back screen, how to defend a flare screen. And we're rotating. And so we put all those 2 or 3 minutes, and they're getting a ton of reps without guys standing around waiting. So after we go through 2 weeks of preseason practice, and we start coming back to now being specific and putting 5-man shells in, and those drills kind of go away, but our guys have an answer. So anytime we show film, anytime after a game, we say, what should you have done on this? Every player in our locker room can say, and I should have had a swing step and absorbed the screen, and the guy guarding the screen should have gone over the cross screen. They know those answers, so now they can play. People talk about why our guys play so hard because I think their minds are so freed up that they don't have to think about what they're supposed to be doing because we went through that whole teaching progression to get to that point. 7 and 8, I think this is the last part of it. So you've developed your coaching knowledge, you've developed your teaching progressions. This is the last part for you guys that all want to be head coaches. Develop your ability to see the game. This is where it comes down to finally coaching games. I tell all you young assistant coaches, go to your head coach and ask him to let you coach. If y'all go on a foreign tour, ask him to let you coach a game or 2 on the foreign tour. In practice, ask him to let you coach against him in situational stuff. Ask him to you and 2 assistants to coach against each other on the days you're going to have inter-squad scrimmage games. Sign up for one of the all-star tours or one of the little religious groups that go out and do tours in the summer. Make the sacrifice and go coach for 10 days to 2 weeks and practice coaching. Because if you don't learn to see the game, you're never going to be that adjustment guy that's going to allow you to get to championship level. And the thing, I'll go back to my high school coaching career is that laboratory allowed me to learn to make a lot of mistakes before pressure got on me. So now when I get in the game, I've been through all those scenarios. I'm not stressed out about that point. Actually, I get calmer when the games get tighter. because I developed my ability to see the game. And the one thing I'll tell you that I learned from an old coach years ago, and I'll share it with you young guys, as you're practicing coaching, work on your ability to not watch the ball very, very little at all. Try to watch off the ball more than you watch on the ball while you're trying to coach your team from a sideline. Whatever you're doing in practice, in a scrimmage, and if you go on a tour, those kind of things, you just find ways and even when if you're not involved in a drill in practice or a scrimmage in practice, look at yourself and develop your ability to see the game. You will be amazed how much easier it is to make corrections at halftime or in a timeout because you look and say, okay, our spacing was really bad over here. Our first screen on the situation was not at the right angle to be at, or our help side defense was 2 steps out of position because you weren't just looking at the ball all the time and trying to coach every dribble and coach every pass. That's important. You have to have that as a part, but I think that needs to be the smallest part of your ability to see the game. And then probably the last one will be the most controversial because you hear all these agents and search firm people and everything is once you've done all that to be a big time coach is you have to develop your network. That's the last phase you get into. And as young coaches, I think everybody tries to spend their time to develop their network first, and they don't learn all that other stuff first. So let's say you developed your network and you've been great with the ADs and you get a promotion, but you never went through the steps of learning how to see the game, learning how to develop your teaching progressions, having enough coaching knowledge, even though because you haven't really been paying attention all the time in practice. We all drift out. I'm an assistant coach. We all drift out some days when the other coach has an assistant coach and we're not always locked in, but you haven't done that. So your network gets there and all of a sudden you get exposed in the other areas. I would call myself out in this conversation right now because number 8 is probably the sequence that I didn't put in place what I needed to. That's probably why I've still been an assistant coach is because I worked on all those first 7 and then this wasn't my cup of tea. I didn't really work on developing your network. So as you put those things down, if you'll work through those phases, sometimes they're overlapping each other a little bit, but you got to be able to put those things together, but don't skip a step and just think I'm recruiting to get me a coaching job. I'm just spending time with ADs and assistant ADs and agents and all that kind of stuff. And you're not prioritizing things in those 8 steps. So I will say amen. We will not have an altar call unless somebody needs it badly. But I will then open it up for questions. And look, I ain't got my wife and my dog. They are done for the night. I ain't going anywhere, so I can take questions and we can chop it up as long as people want to chop it up. So, how many other people you want to go, Coach Sutton? I'm in for the hall.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I want to thank you for just sharing right away. Staying. And so right now the floor is open. Nobody should be shy. Speak up and ask questions, and or you'll just be present when Stan and I have our usual late night conversations.
Coach Jones.
I have a few of those.
Coach Jones, this is Mike Lopez.
Hey, Mike.
Good to see you. And thank you for being here. I want to ask you a question about your longevity. Like, what are some of the pitfalls that, you almost, you either went through at times or you saw ahead of you and avoided? And I think some of us younger coaches listening right now can avoid. You talked earlier about learning from others and their mistakes. Like, what mistakes could we learn from you?
Well, I appreciate that question, Mike. Obviously, it's good to put a face to a voice. I've heard your voice before, and we've done a really fun podcast back a month or 2 ago, and it's great to get to know you on a more eyeball conversation. But
likewise,
for me, the longevity part of this is when I decided coaching was my calling, and I use that word and not try to be disrespectful because I think ministers' callings are the highest calling of all. My dad was a minister. I had 2 brothers who were ministers. I didn't think that was my deal, but I thought I was supposed to make a difference as a coach. So when I decided I was going for the coaching career meant I had to be productive and I had to be in the word longevity. I was in it for the long haul, and I was going to wherever my faith was going to, and my work ethic was going to allow me to get to whatever space and place that the man upstairs wanted me to get to, whatever time. And I always used a phrase with all the way back to when I was a high school coach: if you do the right things long enough, great things will happen for you. The problem with all of us is long enough, especially in today's world where everything is so instantaneous. We got instant news, we got instant Twitter followers and all that kind of stuff, and social media access and comments immediately as soon as we say something. we don't give ourselves enough time to think. So now that long enough problem gets even more filled out in time and space now, where people are rushing the process even more, and they forget about, man, if I'm a coach, I'm going to be this until I can't do it anymore, or they push me out. And that's the way it was for me, Mike, going forward. Was I wanted to be a coach, and that was my mission in life, and I've stayed true to that mission. And I've developed my vision out of that, and so that's the best advice I could give you to that question.
Next question, Cliff Warren.
Hey, Stan. Thanks again for being on. I know everybody here has probably followed your career, and I think we're all learning something new. You mentioned I followed you on another Zoom, and I'm thinking that you're going to repeat some of those things, and you gave me 7 or 8 things to think about that were brand new. So thank you. So I got 2 questions. One is from those first 9 bullets that you pointed out about recruiting attitude and training skill. Did you develop that while in the NBA? I asked that question because a lot of NBA guys talk about getting intel and getting to know the player inside and out, not just talking to the high school coach, the AAU coach, talk to the trainer, talk to the neighbor, talk to the girlfriend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm assuming that has helped you with Florida State. My second question was about those second 8 pillars. Coaching knowledge. Did you treat coaching knowledge like learning someone's plays, learning a new play, like studying in class? Did you have to memorize things?
Okay, so we'll go with the first question. No, the recruiting attitude and training skill probably came from the NBA on not what to do. Just a quick story on that. The day I signed my contract with the Wizards was the day before the draft in June that year. And so they'd flown me up the night before. We're in the locker room where the coaches' offices were in the old MCI Center now. I think it's the Verizon Center now. And they called the coaches up and say, we're going to have a meeting upstairs in the boardroom about the draft tomorrow night. And so I said, man, 5 years ago, I'm a high school coach, and I'm fixing to go up here. I'm fixing to learn an awful lot on the first day. And so we walk in there, and there's like 15 guys in there. Michael Jordan and Wes Unseld are up front, and they're kind of in charge of the organization at that time. And they start the meeting basically like we're fixing to play a pickup game, and they're talking trash about each other and smoking cigars and talking about how each other's inept and what they're doing. And this goes on for 15, 20 minutes. And it's funny now. It was hilarious. I mean, some of the stuff you saw on The Last Dance, Michael was that way in the room. I mean, he was going at Big West. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, this is a different start. And so then Michael finally gets tired of that, and he goes up to the board and he says, we only had 1 pick. It was early in the second round. And this is the day before the draft now. So he walks up and says, give me 10 names that are going to be available at our pick. So they give him 10 names. You got them written up there. And I'll never forget it because the first name was Dan Lange, big 6'10" guy that played at Vanderbilt. And so he says, all right, guys, tell me about Dan Lange. Why should we draft him? I'm looking around. They got all these guys who were supposed to have been scouting all year and that kind of stuff. And they're just shuffling papers and looking around. And they finally say a couple things. And all of a sudden he looks at Coach Hamilton and says, you guys just came out of college. What do you know about Dan Lange? And Coach told him what he knew. And then he said, but we were going to in a bracket with Vanderbilt, and Dan had that scout. He said he probably knows a little bit about him from how much film he watched on him. So within 25 minutes, all of a sudden, Coach Hamilton and I are on the experts on what we need to do for the draft. They had no idea. We get down to the last guy, and he had been the MVP of the Portsmouth deal that year as a senior from Louisiana Monroe, and nobody knew. We didn't know anything about him. The scouts knew nothing about him. They went to try to find a video to watch on him. They bring him in the morning of the draft and drafted him, and he ended up not being a guy that you'd be recruiting for attitude and wanting to train his skill. So we've kind of learned what not to do. But, we kind of got to that point, in Miami when we were about to turn the tables when it was UConn and Syracuse and Georgetown, St. John's in the old Big East days. And then when we got into the ACC here at Florida State is, we just kind of realized there was a certain type of player in terms of their body styles that we try to get. But more importantly, there were going to be some guys that they wanted to come in with a little chip on their shoulder, and they wanted to walk into places and not be looking around when we walked into certain facilities about with the banners and who and who's in the stands or not in the stands. And so that came more out of our competitive spirit to try to compete with the Big East first, and then the ACC once Coach decided to get back into college coaching. Your second question was about, again, the developing your basketball, your knowledge. Okay. Well, as soon as I started coaching, again, I'm a big reader. Back in the day, there used to be a company, I can't remember, I think it was Prentice Hall maybe, but I may be wrong. But they were always sending out flyers of books that were available. And everything that was a book on something like one was about how to coach the matchup zone. One was how to pressure defenses. One was it was 3 series by a guy named Larry Warren. I remember his name was Coaching and Winning, Coaching and Leadership. And I can't remember the third one off the top of my head. It's in my bookcase at my office. But just reading all those things all the time. And then every time a book came out, when a guy won a championship, you see that every time a team wins a championship, within a month, whatever team wrote it, somebody sometimes they're not very well put together, but they put a book in about that season. I wanted to read everything about teams that had won because I wanted to study success. And so I would just go into that. At every clinic I could go to, the clinics back in the day I thought were much more usable for young coaches than they are now. I think they've turned into now, they rush them through. Everybody just wants to tell war stories, and they don't go up and really teach a sequential progression of how to run whatever they're asked to speak about. Well, I try to find ways to communicate. Like even back when I was a high school coach, even with Kevin and David Thorpe and all the guys who were sitting on our side of the lectern back in the day, we'd sit up there, how do you do this? How do you do that? Every stop of the way, Kevin and I would challenge each other. If I was recruiting and he was a high school coach at the time, or we were both high school coaches, we'd meet for a meal somewhere, and we'd have the salt shakers and the pepper shakers as the baskets, and be putting the regular sugar packets for the offense and the sweet loaves for the defense. And we were doing it. I had another guy that was in my conference when I was a young high school coach. And there was a bunch of older guys that kind of thought we were, didn't know what we were doing. So instead of us just being competitors, we got together every Sunday afternoon and talked about how to be better coaches and talked about what he was doing, what I was doing. And I've continued that on today. Every Monday night, there's about 15 to 20 high school coaches in the northern part of Florida. A couple of them are Florida State alums, and they started a roundtable. And instead of us just me talking to them all the time, we just all share. I want to know their ideas. They want to know my ideas. We we send it out before. We're going to talk about 3 subjects. Late game, side out of bounds situation, matchup zone, whatever it could be. And for that hour and 20 minutes, we're just going to have everybody go around and talk about different ways they do things. And I don't think we do that enough in the game nowadays. Everybody's worried about recruiting and everybody's worried about job getting. And back when I started coaching, everybody talked basketball. Everybody wanted to talk about the game. And now everybody wants to talk about the business of basketball. I think we've got things backwards. So that kind of answers in a long way your question, I hope, Cliff.
Thank you.
Next question, anybody?
Stan, it's Orlando Vandross.
What's up, Bo? How are you doing, man?
I got a question. Basically, this is the first time I've really, heard you speak, and clearly you're well versed. And you don't look your age, by the way. I didn't know that.
I guess I'm drinking out of the same water fountain Coach Hamilton is, because he's the Benjamin Button of all of us.
Yeah, he looks great, by the way. I noticed you said you read a lot of books. What leadership book would you recommend?
That's a great question. Some of the books that I think, especially for assistant coaches, that have been impactful for me. There's a book, and it's not one that was over the top in terms of people who bought it, and it's on bestseller list and everything. But it was a book called "How to Get Things Done When You're Not in Charge," and I don't remember it started with a B, but that was a fantastic read for me. When I started, because I was going from, I'd been at really 18 years, because I did elementary school, junior high, and then high school for 14. I had run my own program, and a lot of times without assistants, or if best, we'd have one assistant. So I was going into a staff and trying to learn that dynamic of how to get things done when I wasn't in charge of things, and trying to master the things that I wasn't in charge of. I think that's one thing assistant coaches miss the boat on a lot is when it's not your assignment, are you mastering things that you're not in charge of? So if it ever gets kicked your way, you can handle it. And I even go that with talking about developing myself. You know, when I was a high school coach, I go back a little bit and I'll come back to your answer, Orlando. Every time one of my players got a piece of recruit mail, obviously different now, I'd make them open it up in front of my office, have them read it first, and I say, go down to the secretary and make me a copy. And I organized all those in notebooks back in the day when we didn't have the access to what we do now in terms of computers. And when I got down with Coach Hamilton in Miami, he walked in my office the first week and said, I'm not happy with our mail-out program. He said, I want you to rewrite a whole one for a 12-month calendar cycle. Walked out, did not say anything more about what he wanted to promote, what Miami was about, what he wanted to know about him. He just said, I want a new one. And so I had to figure out how to get that done, but I'd been preparing those things in advance by going through this and reading. So I was able to go back and say, oh, this was really good that one of my players got. How do we flip this to Coral Gables? How do we flip this to the University of Miami? How do we make this meaningful and using things? So, that was one way. The other thing that I would say was a great book for me as an assistant coach was by John Maxwell. I know we've all heard, but the one that was most meaningful for me with John Maxwell is called The 360-Degree Leader, which the whole concept of that book is for guys kind of in our spots as assistants on how do we lead in our peer group. Obviously, we have to lead to the players and the staff that are below us. And how do we lead for the guy that's ahead of us? Our head coach, how do we serve him? How do we lead him? How do we give the best to him? And that book was a fantastic read for me in terms of how to take your leadership when you're not necessarily the guy that's supposed to be out front, but you're getting things done behind the scenes. So those two books have been really powerful for me in terms of assistant coaches and leadership.
Next question.
That's all I got.
Coach Jones, this is Justin.
Orlando, I do have a leadership list. I mean, a book list that if I have a staff thing together for when I'd have a staff, I got 10 books on there. If you chat me or text me or whatever, your email address, I'll send you, because I sent that out from the NABC thing I did earlier in the year. So if you want that list of books, I'll certainly be happy to share it with you. It's not any secrets.
Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
Coach Jones, this is Justin Cardozo down in Miami, Florida. How you doing?
J Card.
How you doing, sir? I had a question with your Stan Jones University. How do you handle things when you're putting those things together, planning, for that opportunity that might come up? How do you handle things within your current program when they differ from what you have in your Stan Jones University? Like, how do you deal with those things as they come up?
That's a real easy question. They never cross paths. When I'm working on stuff that could happen for my future, that stays in that compartment. All I do is serve my head coach, and I try to figure out everything. That don't mean I'm a yes man all the time. I'm gonna bring ideas. I'm gonna say things I don't think I agree with at times, but I always am figuring out how he likes the information presented to him, and how the staff likes information presented to them. And I exclusively for how Coach Leonard Hamilton wants the Florida State program to look like. I never let those intertwine and bleed over into each other, because I think that's the kiss of death as a coach, because now you're not being that 360-degree leader. You're not being that guy that we are now. We want our players to become a team, our staff. We want our coaches to become a staff. And if I'm worried about trying to implement what I think we should be doing, because that's the way I would do it someday, if I'm in that spot, I now have broken that ability for our group of coaches to be a staff. I don't have a long answer for that. Is those just not? There's things I'm going to do. They're exactly done all these years. There are things that I'm going to tweak if I get that opportunity that would be a little bit different, because that's my personality. Differs in Coach Hamilton's personality, and so that's the way I do it. Just keep things compartmentalized.
Thank you.
Next question.
Coach Jones, this is Tyson Wheeler from UMass. How you doing? Thank you for coming on tonight.
Again, another guy that I watched do a scouting report on the way back in the day, and now I'm listening to you as Coach Wheeler.
Isn't it crazy? Time goes by so fast. I don't know if this is a question. I'm still developing as a coach, but one thing I've never really gotten good at is taking notes. So, you gave us some great information tonight. Is it possible for you to, maybe send it to Coach Sutton as a PDF, your notes that you took tonight and gave to us? I wrote down a lot of stuff. I'm sure I missed a lot. I know you can't go over all of it again, but is it possible you can possibly send some of that out?
Coach Sutton and I just had this debate last week about we've become the generation of the PowerPoint slides. And so we've kind of lost our ability to do those things. Everybody talks to us in PowerPoints, so we forget those things. But I will certainly get with Kevin and get that so he can forward it out to you. But as an old coach, I'm going to give you a little bit of chastisement here. Is don't allow yourself to run away from working on your weaknesses. Just like when you were a player, you didn't want to ever have a weakness that the coach could have a tendency on you in the scouting report. You got to make sure you have that as a coach.
Gotcha.
Find ways to practice being a note taker when you can.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Next question, anybody?
Coach Jones, definitely appreciate you. I've been knowing you for years, been to a lot of your practices. Actually have seen you work, you with Coach Hamilton. Definitely admire what you do. You've pretty much killed it for all of us older assistant coaches who are trying to get into business, because you said, definitely you're going to get the younger guys. But my question is, for you being in the business as long as you have and having that connection, it's almost like you and Coach Hamilton, like a relationship, because you're at that point where you can pretty much finish his sentences. For the younger guys who are like starting in the business and getting to know their head coach, what are the suggestions that you have for them to, in terms of building that type of relationship that you have?
Well, it goes back to those military points I talked about. First thing, when I first got with Coach Hamilton, I was a listening sponge. I didn't walk in a staff meeting at all trying to talk about what we should be doing. I wanted to listen about how Coach liked to do it, what everybody's role on the staff was going to be. I remember going all the way. It was probably into our second time around playing Villanova. We're having a staff meeting in the hotel restaurant up in Philadelphia. And the first time I kind of went, the guy didn't have the scout on Villanova. The coach that did have the scout, he was kind of bumping heads with Coach about what he wanted to do in the game plan that day. And Coach finally looked at me and said, "What do you think? What would you do against that kind of play?" And my idea was totally opposite of what the guy that had the scout was. And he blew a gasket and walked out of the restaurant, had to go cool off for a little bit. And Coach said, "Don't worry about it. He's like that all the time." I said, I'm glad you gave me an honest answer. So I tried to listen, go back to that thing, listen, learn what Coach liked, then find a way to help. And then when Coach put me into a leadership spot, I was prepared to do that. So listening was a big part of it. An old assistant coach who was on the staff at the time, Silas McKinney, gave me the biggest advice. And I tell all the new guys that come on our staff, and a lot of guys don't agree with it, but he said a great assistant coach in Division I basketball doesn't need to know everything. He said if there's a meeting going on and you wasn't invited to it, don't panic, don't worry about it. If the door is shut and they didn't invite you to the meeting, don't worry about it. There's reasons for different things that happen in a Division I basketball staff. So as I've gone through that, I've always tried to stay in my lane. I tell people say, "What do you think about doing this?" And I'll tell like our GAs, if it ain't on my job description, I'm not trying to get in the middle of it until Coach asks me what he wants me to be involved in. So I think that's why Coach has done that, because I stay in my lane, but I know when my job is to maybe go me and Coach talk about things just behind closed doors ourselves, when to speak up and say, "Nah, with experience, Coach probably don't want to do it that way." Steve Smith, our new assistant this year, who replaced Dennis Gates, he was great at this. He'd walk in and say, "How does Coach like to do things?" And so he didn't have to go try to guess with Coach. So he'd come in and we'd talk about it and say, "This is what's coming." But you're 100% right on this, Jerry. I'm getting to the point of it's like when I was growing up as a kid, my dad was a pastor. I'd get in some sermons and I knew the illustration was coming. So I'd just be kind of like this. And so I know in some staff meetings with Coach Ham that he's telling a story that he remembers back when he was coaching Bowie and Turpin at University of Kentucky, and some kind of thing that went on in recruitment in that situation. And I'm saying, well, he's telling that to Steve because Steve had never heard this before, but I got to hear this for about the 400th time. So I just kind of, here we go. Kind of, so we've been, I can tell it, I know where it's coming from. And Steve gets kind of funny because he's our newest guy on staff. I say, Coach is probably going to talk to you about this story today. And as soon as Coach starts bringing it up or in front of the team or whatever, Steve will look over at me and say, are you a psychic, Stan? How'd you know? I said, I've been with Coach. I know him. And again, I think that's the biggest dynamic you can have in the system is knowing your head coach, so he trusts you and you trust him. And he's not a better person. And I say this to the young coaches here. Everybody's trying to move up. Jerry, you may get it. There may be a young guy that needs an older guy. That's what I talk about. Everybody's got to look for different things in their staff. But when you get to that point and you're going on a staff, and I kind of lost my train there, calling your name out, but you got to be able to fit within the group. And again, you want our team to play like our players to play like a team. We want our coaches to act like a staff, and you have to find that dynamic. And if you don't, it will implode on you. There's probably some guys on here that could testify on some staffs they've been on. And I would say that for all guys, don't never let be my recruits. Never just talk to your recruits the whole way. I coach every guy on our team the same way, whether I recruited them or not. I tell them all, and this is the last piece of advice I'll give you on Jerry's question. As I coach and I do my part in our staff, in our practices, in our game preparation, is I tell our guys up front, my number one job as your coach is to continually define reality. I'm not going to tell you something like all these young rah-rah rebounders out there who say they're training people. I'm not going to tell you were great every workout. That's not real. I'm always going to define reality to you. And if you do that with every player, you'll find out your team will get better, and you'll find out kids will start gravitating to you because they'll eventually realize you're the only one that's being real with them. And I'll tell them up front, say, now, when you first start practice with us now, everything I say is, and the way I say things sometimes is going to sound really foreign to you because all the multitude of people in your social media rooms and in your family are telling you different. But at the end of the day, you'll start realizing that I'm teaching you the game the right way. I'm teaching you the right kind of discipline it takes to be great. And I'm teaching you when you're really good, and I'm teaching you when you're really bad. But I'm going to make sure I'm going to get 100% out of you, so you can't blame me if you don't make it. And I don't want any credit if you do make
it. Any more questions for Stan Jones?
Coach, I got a question, Coach Sutton.
Jack Casper, Citadel.
Coach Jones, a few years ago, probably about 8 years ago, I had a chance to talk to you when I had a job opportunity. Some people weren't sure I should take it. And you spent about 30 minutes on the phone with me telling me how to be patient. And, of course, I wasn't, and I took the job anyways. but I appreciate the time and everything you gave me. Two-part question here. One, I think as an assistant coach, you can spend so much time trying to actually knock out tasks that need to be done, right? Where I tend to lose track of time, and I hit Coach Sutton up about this probably a month ago. Like, when do you spend time just for yourself? Like, when do you find that 30 minutes or an hour in the day for just like, okay, I'm putting my thoughts on paper now? Do you have a process in place for that you developed over time? Or is that just something, hey, whenever I have time, I find a way to make it work?
I'm going to find time during the week. Unfortunately, sometimes some of the best time when ideas and stuff happen for me is when I can find those quiet moments. Sometimes I write more notes in church about my career than I do about what the pastor's talking about, because you get in that quiet moment and your brain, your creativity starts working. And sometimes the busyness of our days takes our creativity away from us. And so I find that time. I try to find – I'm a late night guy. So after the house, the dog and the wife go to bed, I'll just be sitting there and I'll try to find that time if I hadn't got to it by then. But also try to – on my spiritual side, when I was working on Stan Jones the Man, I'm going to not sacrifice that every day, whether it's early or it's late. And I've also learned, Jack, in times, and some of you got some of the obsessive nuts in our business, which I don't think we have to do it that way. I get to the point some days I got a whole thing I expect to get done that day, and if I don't get it done because things pop up. My grandfather was a farmer, and he always said when I was a kid, it doesn't pay to plan your work, because the day you think it's going to rain, it's not. The day you think it's not going to rain, it does. So you got to be able to adjust. Well, things are going to pop up. Well, I've got to the point where I can stop. Other than exactly, if we're getting a scout ready, we're getting a recruiting visit ready or whatever, I won't stop till that gets done. But other things, just in terms of sometimes phone calls we got to make, or texts we got to make, or recruiting mail we got to make, I can get to tomorrow on that. I've got real at peace with that over experience, where I can come back. I make sure it gets done, and I keep working in my sequence there. But I don't make myself so stressed out trying to get everything on my to-do list done every day that it causes me not to think about my life, my career, my moment that we're in. You know, I think you go back to that Jim Valvano quote: "Is you got to give yourself a chance to think every day." And so you got to find a way to do that in everything that you do. I remember I heard Jerry Wainwright when he first became a head coach at North Carolina Wilmington, and Lamont he won't notice about the coaching staff, but Lamont played for him. He made his coaches every day take, I don't know if it's a half hour or an hour, and talk about financial ways to make more money. And he talked to me, he said, you always have to find that time every week or every day. I don't know if he did it every day or every week, that he made his staff stop recruiting, stop practice planning or whatever, and work on finding a way for you to make more money so you can take care of your family. And I don't think we value that enough because we get so many people that, you know, and you think about it, there's a lot of guys being at 6 a.m., go home at 10 o'clock. And that's what I value about working for Coach Hamilton so much is he may be in the office at 10 o'clock one night, but he'll have told you to go take your wife for dinner that night. So, man, you make your calls at home, man. You ain't got to be making your calls from here. I trust you. You know, you got these other guys telling you they want you to document every call you make. So I go back to saying this, as you look to take jobs, it's more important who you work for than what level you work at. And so it's really, really, really critical if you're going to be happy in this business and you're going to stay as a career, that you keep that in mind. That's why, you know, I haven't had that kind of opportunities where I could leave coach. There's been some, but when you work for a guy like Coach Hamilton, and every time something goes wrong in our office, whether it's a game plan, whether it's a recruit that we lose, he's never the guy finger pointing and saying, man, you screwed that up. He'll always say, if I was the lead guy on a recruit and we lose the guy, he'll always come in and say, man, I didn't help you enough with that. If I'd have done this with you, we could have got that done. You know, if we screw up something in a game plan, you know, he's always putting it on himself that, you know, we just didn't think this out. He never calls a player out in the paper. So when you work for a guy like that, it makes you know, very hard to go just jumping around everything just to say you're making progress in your career. So I hope I answered your question, Jack.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Stan, we want to be respectful of your time. Can you just, you've spoken for an hour and a half and you dropped a lot of nuggets, but can you just share one more piece of advice to all of us? And we would be much appreciative. Just anything that comes to your heart that you would like to share with this group in closing.
Yeah, I will do that. It goes back to the simple thing of why you start. You know, you've heard the old line, what's your why? You know, never forget what your purpose is. And it goes back to a story I read just the other day in a book I'm reading on spiritual things. It was talking about Mother Teresa and all the things she did, from starting with being a nun with 3 pennies to build that orphanage, all the lives she affected in India. And as she got to the end of her life, a lot of the common question that was always asked is, how were you able to do what you were able to do? And what advice would you give somebody to do the same thing that you did? And the simple thing was that she said in 4 words, go find your Calcutta. And as we all are coaches and we're leaders and we're saying we're difference makers with our kids, you know, find that place in your world where you know your purpose is, that's your Calcutta, that you know you're going to grow where you're planted and you're going to serve your purpose and you're going to complete your mission. And a lot of times that doesn't get discussed in life very much anymore because we're moving so fast. So serve your purpose, follow your calling, believe in who you are, keep fighting when the faith don't look like it's there for you. Learn this: God will always be faithful, and when He's faithful, it strengthens your faith. So continue to fight the good fight, keep making a difference, and don't stop believing.
On behalf of everybody on this Zoom, we cannot thank you enough for pouring into us tonight. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, Stan has been on every one of these Zooms. And it's not by happenstance that I asked him to come this week to speak to us. I allowed him several weeks to lurk in the dark, as he calls it, to watch this group right here. And after every Zoom, he called me up and we talked about it. And he was so totally impressed with our group. And you guys are doing some amazing things. as we realize and understand that we're in the middle of a health pandemic and we're in the middle of a social, racial pandemic, continue to be the men of God that God called all of us to be, and impact right where you are, so we can empower and we can evolve and we can continue to make this place a better place, because we all are either having children or have children, or we have people that are younger than us that are dependent on us and they're watching us right now. So as coaches and as teachers and as educators, let us stand up right now and be the men of God that God has called us to be, and let's serve him everywhere that he's putting us. Bloom where you're planted. I'm so honored to be a part of all of you, and I hope that you continue to come back here, because what we're doing here is impactful, and what we're doing here is going to continue to impact the student athletes that come under your leadership. So thank you so much, Stan. I can't thank you enough.
You're most welcome, and I did forget this. If you want the reading book, my email is sjones@fsu.edu, sjones@fsu.edu.